Welcome, everyone, to another Friday edition of What Is. This is where we at Udefine Wellness dive into a modality with one of our wellness providers. And I am Denise O'Malley, the founder of Udefine Wellness, and I got to tell you, it's absolutely my pleasure to bring this to you every single week. This week, we're doing something a little bit different than what we have in the previous, and it's something you may not have ever heard of before, but you may really need. We have a provider in our network who, when she and I first met, she was a fitness coach. And then events in life happened. And she has expanded her business into providing support for those going through some sort of grief. So I am not going to take any more of the stage away from her. Please help me welcome Peggy Green, owner of The Grief Specialist in the Denver, Colorado area. Peggy, it is all yours.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much, Denise. And I want to thank everybody else for being here. So, what we're going to be talking about today is what is grief coaching. And so you may have never heard of it. Coaching is just really a new option for those who are grieving. So Denise, if you want to, you can go ahead and flip on to that next slide.
Working on it.
The next one. There we go. Good. So we're going to talk about today's state of mourning, kind of the state of the union of mourning. I want to share a little story with you. So as a young child, I did not learn how to grieve or mourn. When I visited my grandparents, we would have to drive by a cemetery and I would duck in the back seat and I wouldn't see the graves, the headstones, and I also would hold my breath while we passed by. I can't explain the breath holding, but I can explain the ducking because they scared me. I didn't understand them. And so I thought maybe if I breathed the air from the cemetery too, I would die. I can't remember, but it was a long time ago and I wasn't exposed to it. I had no experience with death, dying, and mourning. So I want to just mention that there's no manual for grieving. And so what I want to now talk about is the view of death and dying in a couple different areas and why this helps to create that necessity for being able to work with a grief coach. So in the United States today, death is primarily understood through the concept of medicine, focus on treatment, recovery, and cure. So if you think even back 100 years ago, so many people actually passed away in their homes. And now people are passing away in nursing homes and in hospitals. So death is often perceived as a failure of the medical system, and talking about death and grief makes so many people uncomfortable because you just don't know how to do it. It's seen as an individual medical problem, and it seems to be a crisis to be resolved. And it started out like even with Freud in the 20th century. So mourners were often told to put the past behind them, get back to normal, and move on. And mourning is an ongoing process of renegotiating a relationship, a continuing bond with someone who's no longer here and helping us to feel better. It's relinquishing attachment of giving up the past, but not to the relationship. It's a lifelong process. It's continually revisited and renegotiated. And so sometimes when we are grieving, others don't understand us. And if I were to be with, let's say, Denise, and she's grieving, I could get impatient because in our society, we look at death as being a loss, like he lost his battle to cancer. It's a sports term, and we use it about competition. And really, of course, death is not losing, and being alive is really not about winning. So let's talk about just some traditions, and this is something I've found. I'm not Jewish, but from what I understand, the rituals and structures of Jewish mourning can play an important role in processing grief. And they don't need to create their own ways of grieving. They have something that's been passed down from generation to generation, their tradition of sitting in Shiva, and they don't need to look any further on how to grieve. What we do know is that dying is universal. And how people respond to it is shaped by history, culture, politics, economics, religious forces, and your beliefs. And it's how we relate to the community and the social identities of those who have passed. So Jews, they think about death and it's influenced by their heritage and the larger American culture. Now let's talk about Christian tradition. In some areas, it is traditional just to have a gathering and a meal after the funeral and the burial. And sometimes it's held in public places or a church. And the purpose this time is to share memories of the deceased, to comfort the grieving family, and to show hospitality to those who have traveled to attend the services. And these meals may demonstrate a celebration of life, then more so than mourning. And really, when I was doing some looking into this, is that Christianity doesn't have a prescribed amount of time for the actual period of mourning versus like sitting in Shiva with the Jews. It's usually held the funeral within a week of the death, and the time from that death to the burial is considered the time of mourning. But that's really just such a short time. And also, after that, most people return to work. And they even had not had an opportunity to start to be able to process their losses at all. So let's go ahead and go on to that next slide, Denise. Great. And we wanted to talk about what really helped bring me into the path of grief coaching. And so I wanted to share this with you a little bit about my personal experience. So I mentioned at the beginning, my experience with death as a young girl. Now that has now dramatically changed. When I was 30, I lost a child. Since then, both my parents, my sister, friends, and a second child have passed away. Now I'm very comfortable with death and dying. And I want to share with the loss of my first child, I was the poster child of that Christianity loss process. You know, it was actually shorter than a week by the time we had the funeral. I went through those Christian steps with the funeral, the meal, and some support after the service. My mom and sister were available, but struggled how to support me in child loss. It was horrible. I didn't have the resources to help me with my trauma. And as I mentioned, the losses in between my first and second, I experienced those losses and I built resources for myself. And then when my second child, my son, passed away 2 years ago, all those tools and resources I had in between my first loss and my second child loss were the things that I brought together to help myself. And I soon discovered that those were helpful in helping others and what they were going through. So it was my personal passion and my mission to help other grieving moms. Now, I must say, I didn't exactly wake up one day and decide to be a grief coach. I did not choose to be an expert at grief and loss. It chose me. I surely would not have chosen it to go through all that I did in the past. Yet I know that the knowledge, compassion, and learning that I've experienced are the results of my past trials, and they're truly gifts. And when I went through my first loss, there was no one to support me. And now others need to have my support. And the reason why I share that is because coaches like myself, we want to help others because we've been through it. And we know that nobody deserves to do this alone. It comes from our own experiences. It's the desire to help others, and we want to help them discover the meaning of life after the death of a loved one. And the thing is, I do want to share is that we also look at how complicated it is, and we may refer clients to other mental health professionals. Now, Grief Coach supports you while you're mourning, and slowly but surely we guide you to recovery. Death and loss are difficult, but the grieving process is natural, life and death. A grief coach will help you deal with tough emotions, recognizing they are valid and really need to be felt. And many grief coaches started in this because of their own experiences. I know I did. And clients feel comforted by knowing that I've walked in their shoes, know their heartache, and understand what they're going through. So Denise, if you want to go ahead and flip on over to the next one. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit about grief coaching versus grief counseling. I think so many people have a tendency to go to grief counseling or grief therapy, but grief coaching is an option. So just the difference. So grief counseling or therapy focuses on the past, and there's a lot more talking and discovering unresolved feelings that they may have had with a loved one who passed away. It focuses on their emotions as well and giving you a sense of what's feeling. So it's a lot more talk therapy, and just you can go in and feel like you've got a friend that you're talking to. Therapy has a lot of great listening skills. So then as a grief coach, it focuses on your future. So we're leaving the past, not helping you to forget that loved one by any means, but you do have a choice whether or not you move forward and continue to live your life. So a grief coach helps you focus on getting back up on your feet. And I love the fact that we love to have personal growth after loss. I mean, like me, I've exploded exponentially on the way that I've grown in the things that I'm doing. Like I said, I wouldn't have chosen to be a grief coach. I've also took up and wrote a book. So I would love to have my child back, my children back, my family back. But because of that, I'm now helping others. So and it focuses on action, grief coaching. They help to change your behavior and improve the way you think. And it's not just about your loss. It's all encompassing with your whole life. So I personally incorporate your physical, your mental, your spiritual, and your emotional health so that you're well rounded and that you're able to function in all the areas of your life. And so we offer practical experience and advice on how to move forward after your loss. And we lead you on that path to recovery. So Denise, let's go ahead and pop on to the next slide. So what to expect from working with a grief coach? And this is one of the things, ask this question. I get this question asked of me all the time. When do I start working with a grief coach? And I'm going to bring this analogy to you because we have somebody here that just had an accident and an injury, and she did not wait to go seek medical care. Once she had that accident, she's like, oh, my shoulder hurts. I fell down. I need to seek medical care. She didn't go home and think about it and go, this is out of place. This really hurts. I'm going to wait to seek medical care. It's the same thing when seeking help and assistance and working with a grief coach. You don't want to wait because they can give you tools and resources to help you start immediately dealing with that initial trauma that you're going through. And when you can deal with that initial trauma, you're less likely to get stuck in a bad place. So they help with compassion and understanding and moves you forward and helps you to create that vision. They help you process those feelings, but the goal is to look ahead. You are alive and have a future to plan. So loss may change, and the grief shows you how to adapt. Think about your loss doesn't have to define you, but how it can refine you. So I mentioned becoming better, becoming a grief coach, writing a book. But this example might even make sense to you. So I frequently see somebody say, here for my example, I can define myself as Connor's mom forever 24, or I can just define myself as a mother of 4 living a happy, joy-filled life. So I don't let Connor's life define me because I have other children and I have a life to continue on. So grief coaches will guide you through unfamiliar territory, who's been through it before, and help you understand your emotions, provide you the support you need to minimize the feeling of being alone. I said, when, at least in the United States, that we have a tendency after a week, everybody's gone. And I tell you, that's when things really hit. And that's when you really need the support. And we'd love to challenge you in a positive and compassionate way to have you look ahead and move forward. We don't have you look back at what was, we want you to see what is and rebuild your life and find meaning and purpose. And that death, whether sudden or expected, will turn your world upside down and leave you lost with no idea how to navigate how your life has changed. That's where a grief coach will help and help you to figure out what is going on. They know how to move you forward and prepare you to recover and help you to connect with your absolute best and help to build strengths and tools to redesign your life. And along with that, as we grieve, we're the role model for others to grieve. And so I'm the role model for my girls, for my family and my friends in teaching them. When we go back to those expectations, like I said, is that in the United States, we just don't have a grief style. And this helps them to be able to understand how we can grieve. So we work together to reach the goals and help you navigate the sadness. And memories will always be a part of who you are. And that's part of the healing. You can learn how to feel good again. So talk about the affordability of grief coaching. So one of the things that's important in between grief coaching and grief counseling is that counseling pre-COVID has been conducted in their office. So they have the overhead. And now grief coaching can be done online, in groups, or one-on-one. And that eliminates any of those costs. And we're not trying to make up for any differences in the formal education and recover that because we have life experiences. So Denise, let's go ahead and go on to our next one. Perfect. So details of grief coaching. So how do you work with a coach? What does that actually look like? You've heard a lot about it. So coaching is typically delivered in 60-minute sessions. I said you can do them one-on-one, and more frequently now we have the ability to make that connection, visual connection, or you can do it on the phone. And sometimes you can do grief coaching in a group setting as well. But you find that it's emotionally engaging and focused on your unique situation. I personally have a curriculum and a process because you don't know what you don't know. And you don't know that you need to think about something differently to help you get through that process. I've been through this, so I am aware of areas that are important in moving through your grief. And I bring these areas to the surface. And I believe my client's ability to move through their loss. But it does take intentional work. And we all come through that as grief coaches. So a grief coach can help you. I'm not quite there, almost. I can to reconnect with your strength, your coping strategies, and the relationships. And I make no assumptions about what you feel, think, or want. I want to come to your sessions with an open mind and ear and really listening to what you are saying. And sometimes we need that person to reflect and guide and direct us and ask you questions and help you to think differently. And your untapped capabilities come through. And that's what we want to take a look at. And another question I frequently get is, does coaching impede the grieving process? No, it does not. Like I said, it helps in the healing. Think of it as that cast that gives you the support, and it helps you. We mentioned seeking a grief coach immediately. So I want to leave you with this 3 things to consider when you're choosing a grief coach. And I believe that most coaches, like myself, will offer a complimentary session to see about the connection and that relationship and make sure that it is a good fit. So, the first thing is, does that grief coach have passion to help you through what you're going through? Really, I've been through it a couple times and I understand it. And what about their experience? Have they been through it? And then the tools and resources that they might offer to you, have they personally used those? Well, I know that all those tools that I built over the past 30 years have been responsible for helping me to get to where I am today. So consider those things as you're seeking out help, whether it be a grief coach or a grief counselor, and how they work with you. So that really wraps up what grief coaching is. And ask yourself, is this something for you? So, Denise, thank you. And so, what questions might you have? I want to open up the floor here for other questions, but I also want to let you know, if you personally have questions for me, you can text the word learn more, all lowercase is fine, learn more, to 719-789-6808, and I can help you out. Okay. But thank you so much for joining us.
Wow, Peggy. This was fantastic. And for those who were not able to get that down really quick, I'm going to just tell you there's a really neat little feature on this video that we're recording. That's a rewind button. So you can go back and capture the screen and get all that information from Peggy. So we have a couple of questions here. Is, in your opinion, is working it as a group or an individual better?
Denise, that is very much left to an individual. And some process better in a group coaching scenario, and then others on a one-to-one basis. And it's their level of comfort. It's really what I suggest on that.
I had never heard of grief coaching until you came out with this new company that you've created, The Grief Specialist. I watched you in your journey. I knew you before Connor's loss, and then watching your journey afterwards. You wrote a book, which was amazing that you were able to do this. You want to plug your book real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, it's over my shoulder here, but it's called Life After Child Loss, The Mother's Survival Guide to Cope and Find Joy. And it is available on Amazon. And the thing is those are the tools and resources which I've brought together. And it shares my journey from beginning to where I am now. I wrote the book about 1 year after Connor passed away, and have seen hundreds of people that it's helping on their journey, because it gives them something to relate to and a process. And then that's where we take it a step further in working with people. I also focus on the 4 cornerstones of health and healing, like I mentioned, the spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental, because it's a holistic whole body approach to your healing and to your life.
Absolutely. For those who are here joining us live, any of you want to unmute yourselves and ask a question of Peggy?
I'd love to ask a follow-up question on the one that you just asked
Yeah.
before, because Peggy, of course, I fully understand what you're saying, that some people do better individually, and others do better in groups. I'm thinking about those scenarios where a family loses a loved one. So not quote unquote just the mom or just the dad,
Oh, uh-huh.
um, But so, I don't want to call it family counseling because, or family grief counseling, because very often you might also have it like in a school situation, especially right now, where the whole class of students, they have a common grief. And some of them, of course, would be doing well individually, but what would your recommendation be in those instances where you have groups that have a common loss?
Yeah, Natalie, and I love that question. And one of the things, especially, I'm going to focus on child loss just for a moment, because the dynamics of that loss is so different in between a mother, a father, and siblings. And with my first loss, I was married, and my daughter's father and I dealt with this quite differently. And had I had the resources that at that time, I went to seek help with my mom and my sister. But if there was grief coaching available, I would have sought that. But I know that her dad would not have. And so we encourage them to be able to talk about it, but it's sometimes difficult to bring that out. And it's more of leaving that door open. So if you have a family that's open to coming and talking, you bring together as many people as are willing. And if it's a classroom setting, again, it's bringing them together as many as willing, and teaching them how to mourn. So it's very individualized and how people want to respond to it, because you can lead a horse to water, but if they're not open to accepting any sort of help, then there isn't much more you can do but to be that role model and do it yourself.
So we tailor a lot of these when we're posting it and sharing it with in our different groups that we have to other health and wellness professionals so that they can identify resources for their existing clientele. So no matter what their modality may be. So how would you advise a health and wellness professional who sees a client going through something, a loss, to approach them to say, hey, I think you need to go see Peggy? Because just from my own opinion or my own experience in going through grief, somebody coming up to me saying, hey, you need help, you need to go contact this person, it's not working. So Peggy, what would you recommend as a way to approach their clients?
And that's, again, a great question. I get that one asked a lot, because like, how do I help this person that is grieving?
Yeah.
And because so many times you can't understand what their loss is. And really what I'd like to do is just to continue to leave that door open and be with them, and just, it's like, okay, let's say again, it's like you and I, and you lost your husband. I haven't lost a husband, but I can come and sit and be with you and see how you're doing, and continue to ask the questions like, how are you processing with this? Are you taking care of yourself? Evaluating, kind of doing a mini evaluation on their response to their grief, and possibly suggesting, what, I'm seeing a lot of this. I'm seeing that you're really struggling, and I understand it, but here's somebody who can walk alongside with you. They're not trying to fix you. I think that's a big thing, is that we're not trying to fix them. We're trying to help them find themselves. And I think it's how you approach it and how you say it. Somebody that can talk with you, that you can share your story with, that's going to understand, and that opportunity to really connect, and letting them know that there's somebody that's been through it. So I think that's it. And just saying, just talk to her. She can offer you some ideas.
Yeah. Other questions you guys have? Lori?
Good morning. Interesting subject, Peggy, especially with the last year. There's a new layer of the separation, and besides grief, now you're dealing with anger and rage and separation with people died suddenly. And then there was that whole level, oh, this thing's a whole fake. And then all of a sudden your loved one's dying. So I think the death paradigm is more complex this year than it has been before, even though it was never addressed. And so I just like, what my question is, what do you think of those new dynamics? And then my second question is, there's levels of grief. You're dealing with death, but people lost their jobs, their income, their livelihood, their home. I mean, there's been so much loss, and on every level of loss, there's grief. So I think the need for counselors is even bigger. It's way beyond one person. So those are my questions. Like, how have you noticed a new layer of beyond grief, and how do we address all of the grief of the last year?
Yeah, great questions, Lori. So if I understand, is with the COVID and isolations, dealing with that, and then to deal with the other types of loss. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, perfect. So, it's definitely getting more complex because the isolation that happens with it, and that doesn't create the more anger. And then also, like I talked about that grieving, to have a Zoom funeral, we lose that connection. And so, yeah, people are struggling with that. And so it's being able to figure out what they can do to be able to work through that and say, okay, this is temporary. I can still grieve my loss, but looking for connection the best they can at this point. And if it's continuing to connect with people via Zoom, that's the way to do it. And the anger, again, anger at not just that the person has died, angry at the circumstances. And so I help people to reevaluate and rethink and redirect that anger, because unfortunately at this point, not getting into politics, but there isn't much choice that we have at this point. It's still required to wear a mask, or you're limited access to loved ones in nursing care. So how can we redirect that, and how can we rethink about it? So that's where I help in bringing that. And then as far as the grief, all the different types, we have loss of job, we have loss of relationships, we have loss of even things, as COVID has taken jobs from so many people, their loss of finances, and even loss of pets. So really, I feel that grief applies to all of that. And we still need to process, because it's something that we love, that was important to us. And so you can apply these same processes in thinking about it. How's your physical health? How do you think about things? Do you have that higher power? So grief is grief when it comes to that. And you can have the same tools and resources. Now it gets a little bit more customized, because I've experienced child loss and child loss by suicide. And suicide loss is a little bit more complex and crazy and messy, because it's just such a different modality than other deaths. So understanding a little bit about the modality, but when we lose something, we've lost something, and we still grieve it, and we still need the same tools and resources to be able to move through that.
Yeah, that is well done. Well said. Thank you so much. Yeah, the tools reach across the spectrum, and I wanted to honor the people who are grieving on so many levels and what we can do for them. So thank you. Great answer.
Lori,
Yeah,
thank you
you're
for that
welcome, Lori.
question. This is the week where it is the anniversary of the pandemic being announced a year ago, and the shutdown and everything. And this week there's been a lot out there about lives well lived, and the memories and honoring it. And so thank you, Lori, for bringing that out. One last question that I have for you, Peggy, is can you talk about the importance of ceremony in the grieving process? I've seen you do a lot of ceremony in the last 2 years.
Yeah, ceremony is, gosh, it's been pivotal for me. My son passed away before the pandemic, and so it was so important to see the people that came to celebrate his life.
Mhm.
He was 24, so he wasn't living at home. And I didn't know the people that attended that were there. So I spoke at his service, and I had people stand up. I asked the questions like, where do you know my son from? And there were about 300 people at his funeral. And, my first question was, okay, those of you who knew him through school, stand up. Big swoosh, even though he was 24. Those who knew him through a 12-step program, swoosh. And in between those two, it was about half of those people that knew him. And just having that ceremony and being able to hear those stories was so important, and to share them. And that was a big piece. And he was cremated. And so we didn't have a cemetery to go to. And we didn't have at that time immediately a place to go to versus a cemetery. We purchased a living urn, which included his ashes, and then a sapling, which would be provided to us at a later time. Well, trying to plant a sapling in different places got a little bit complicated. But we eventually found someplace that my son visited all the time, and that was a skate park. He was a skateboarder. So we planted a larger size tree and had a memorial rock set in place. And that memorial was at his 2-year mark. And that was a ceremony where we brought together, again, friends and family to recognize him and recognize that this was a place that he so enjoyed. And the important thing is, it's not like I felt like there was a timeline in which to get this completed. It's not like, oh, I need to have a cemetery plot and a headstone placed in a week. His sisters and myself, we worked together to find what really resonated with us and what would really give honor to Connor. And it wasn't something that we knew immediately. And so I gave myself permission. And I think that's a big thing, is to give myself permission and the grace to find something that worked. And so that ceremony was just absolutely amazing, and it gave me great peace in knowing that he still lived in others' hearts. Mm-hmm. So that was really huge. So I think that it's not your typical ceremony. So you create that which you want and what works for you.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions from our panel that's here? Okay. That being said, Peggy, you belong to a club that none of us want to belong to. And for you to channel that experience into being able to deliver to the world, to help others who are walking in the path that you had set forth on, it's just an amazing gift that you're doing. And so thank you for sharing that with everyone out there. We're going to invite you, Peggy, to put your contact information also in the Facebook Live comment section, and we will also include it when we post this on YouTube. With that being said, thank you very much for this fantastic conversation. I think it's very timely. It's very important for us to have it as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Denise. I want to thank those who attended and panelists. I appreciate you.